If you look at our 400 years of innovation, it was a crisis. We reached the bottom, and we had to do something. And people said, oh, this is what we have. What are we going to do with what we have? And started something fresh using all those same tools and resources. So I'm not sure what that crisis has to look like, but I think it has to be a crisis that actually makes people realize they have to think differently. It's not a repair of the same way of thinking, it's thinking differently, and I'm not sure we've hit it.
On one hand, so many in Massachusetts are aware that we can lose our lead in the world of innovation very easily, as happened to other key cities over time. And on the other, we have a track record as a region in coming back from 4 major economic downturns over our history. And it was generating waves of innovation, second to none, over our past 4 centuries that I'm going to maintain brought us back. Today, we are seen as one of the 3 or 4 most innovative hubs globally. We had 300 years of innovation, which changed the nation of the world before 1945, when most feel that the research bent of the government under Roosevelt led to support for new innovation in other parts of the country. Today, we bring you all together to consider 2 important topics. First, what explains why Massachusetts has been one of the world's leading centers for innovation over time? And second, using some of this analysis to guide us as we're thinking about our future. First, I'd like to set the stage looking at the major downturns. From a new vantage point, a number of us began in 1997 with the help of Rosabeth to look at what makes this area so innovative. It's a history where diverse groups who populate our region played a role. The children of African American slaves, Boston's Yankee Brahmins, older immigrant generations, and those immigrants who have flown in and settled here in recent decades. Take a look here at the 4 major declines and the industries and innovations that we'll be showing in a little bit, which drove that recovery. We draw here much on the work of Professor Ed Glazer, a Harvard economist, on 3 out of these 4 collapses, as well as our own 2 decades of research on this. So in a few minutes here, I want to show you the path this hub has taken during 9 different uniquely Boston economic areas, each with their own symbolic picture and list of the innovations. Mass Bay Colony in Boston started as a farm town, with cattle and land as its principal drivers. From the beginning, 1630, it grew rapidly for a decade. However, in 1642, a number of the Mass Bay Puritan investors and wealthiest leaders began to leave the colony to fight in England for the Puritan cause with Cromwell against the king. The economy here collapsed. The larger farms and estates couldn't find buyers. Even prominent leaders like John Winthrop, the governor, declared personal bankruptcy. Why didn't these settlers abandon Boston as they did in some early seaside American colonial towns? Well, Winthrop and others took the bull by its horns and consciously changed our economy from farm to a trade economy, along with substantial shipbuilding. Within 10 or 20 years, the town was a boom town, driven by its successes in establishing trade routes. Boston became the preeminent town in British North America in the 1720s. How did it do it? Well, it really was a result of trade routes and global demand for our products. The big one was the development of the salt cod trade. Governor Winthrop and others helped to develop the trade, selling the cheap, nutritiously rich skins to Caribbean sugar plantations in the islands. Ships returned to Boston with cash and sugar, Ironically, the wave of innovation and trade led Puritan Boston to become the global center for rum and fudge, as well as cod. A wealthy port town with a goodly number of African American slaves were brought from the West Indies. However, 40 years after it hit its height, there was a second economic collapse. This was economic and military and political, really. The moment of victory was a moment of profound economic defeat. Proudly led by General Washington himself, in March of 1776, Boston became the first, and Massachusetts became the first liberated state in what would become a new nation just 4 months later. However, the years of strife and then war had really taken its toll. About 85% of the population had left. Sailors and sailmakers found no jobs and moved. The city had closed the harbor. When the British gave up in '76, many Tories left with the British Army, and smallpox had hit at the same time. So 85%, yes. So how did Boston get reborn a second time when most counted it out? Lots of factors. 2 years after the Revolution, a group of former leaders led by John Hancock created the first state-chartered bank in the new nation. It played an important role, that bank, in developing 2 years later the China trade. While not as large as the trade before, which had been banned by the British, the China trade played a good role in replacing the Caribbean trade. The population returned by the 1790s, and in the next 60 years, the area was a huge engine of growth, particularly around the first textile mills and leading the nation in the early decades, so that by the 1850s, Massachusetts had more textile mills than I think the rest of the country combined. At the same time, its sea captains, its first mates, its navigators were seen as the best. New York Harbor was essentially run by Yankee captains and first mates, as well as them running our harbors up here. In the 1850s, it had become one of the most vital cities in the US. Immigrant Donald McKay built the clipper ships, the fastest ships ever sailed in Boston. We had taken a large wave of Irish immigrants fleeing from the famine. Just as the city had been a cradle of liberty, it was also the largest single engine in the national movement to abolish slavery. And then a crash on this side. By the late 1850s, there was a national panic and depression, and coming at the same time, it was the time when the steamships began to go faster than the sailing ships on the Liverpool run for postage. The wooden sailing ship industry really began its collapse. Steamships take their place, and Boston just wasn't there. The bottom really fell out of the shipbuilding industry, which was crucial to the city in the past. But it came back again a third time, and actually this time it didn't take much time. Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, the invention in Boston, Bell Company and AT&T had their national headquarters in the city for about 3 or 4 decades. It was a center for the bicycle craze in the 1880s and 90s, great on hospitals, the world leader in shoemaking, Gillette with its razors, MIT, textiles, the first electric power plants. This fat period went through the early 1920s. And then the fourth collapse, and this one was a bit of a different sort. It lasted for 30 years, from the 1920s through the late 50s. Very quickly in the 30s, the shoe industry largely closed. The wool industry, textile industry, where we had been #1 in the world, closed down. Much went to the south. And recovery started slowly. because of the continued decline through the 1950s. By the mid and late 30s into the 40s, the small electronics industry really began to expand alongside with our universities and medical sectors. The modern venture capital industry was founded in 1946 to keep the invented edge growing. By the 1970s, Fidelity returned as a major force with check writing off of mutual funds. IT grew with Boston being a world center of the mini computer industry, Digital, Prime, others. Then in the 90s, well, mini computers faded. Before the new IT development came about, the biotech industry took off here like nowhere else in the world. Wave after wave of innovation in IT, Cascade, Sycamore, EMC, iRobot, Nuance, and hundreds of others. At the time, our social innovators kept coming, social innovations kept coming, and we are the first state, of course, to legalize same-sex marriage, and the first to compromise together and put together a universal healthcare system. The city has come back after terrible times of economics and developed through innovation. Trade routes, fast sailing ships, textiles, machinery, electronics, the microwave, and on it goes. Like a few other cities in other parts of the globe, Boston has risen through distinct waves of innovation, mobilizing our economic resources. With our research, we started with about 60 innovations, and by this past summer, 19 years later, we have researched almost 600 innovations, which started in Massachusetts and have changed the nation and the world. So let's turn to our panelists today to see what lessons can be drawn out of these waves of innovation and periods of decline. So let me turn to Rosabeth as our first speaker. From your perspective, why has Greater Boston been so innovative over centuries of time?
So first of all, thank you for having me here, and it's great to be here with old friends Janice and Tim and Travis, who has even more in his career where we were together all the time. So I spend a lot of time helping companies think about innovation, how to get more innovation, particularly already established companies. And often the first thing they say to me is, we want more innovation, who else is doing it? or they'll say, we want more innovation, we just don't want to be the first. So there's something about innovation is putting new ideas into use, and innovation by definition requires a great deal of courage. Because you have to stand out there and be willing to be the first, be willing to hear the negativity, be willing to have you, be willing to hear people saying, well, 400 years of history says we can't possibly do it. So there's a lot of things about innovation that are more than just being very creative. But of course, the key to innovation here, as it is anywhere, but we have more of it, we're lucky, is brains. It's people thinking it up. And so for brain power to work, and we cultivate brain power here, we encourage brain power to come here. They have to get admitted to our colleges and universities. And while I'd like to, I think it's heavily MIT, but Harvard is in the mix in terms of having produced a great deal of innovation, social innovation, as well as technological innovation in our graduates. It's those, how many do we have in Massachusetts now? 250 colleges and universities, all of which recruit people with fresh minds. They're here, of course, to learn from established wisdom, but that's an incredible asset, and it's that asset especially built up after World War II, attracted to this region that keeps this region vibrant. But you not only, you want the fresh thinking, but then fresh thinking, as I said before, challenges orthodoxy. And we have two coasts of the U.S. that do a pretty good job of challenging orthodoxy, and then we have other parts of the country that are not so good, that deny science, that are not that interested in the facts, that don't care about evidence. But this coast, at least, and the Northeast cares about that. So I would say It's brain power that's allowed to use the brain power to challenge conventional wisdom and think differently, that is willing to find new paths even when everybody says it can't be done. And that's a kind of free thinking. I'm going to make a little political statement here. I'm going to be slightly political. It's that kind of free thinking that's associated with the blue states. The blue states are much more liberal, much more progressive, much more willing to challenge orthodoxy. I mean, gay marriage, 97% of everybody in Massachusetts now has some form of health insurance. And that didn't come only from one party. Even our reds in our blue state are more blue. They're however I don't want to say purple, but we're really a blend. And that's incredibly important because innovation is constantly challenging whatever the last innovation was. I mean, I now have, Tim knows him well, but somebody all over me who's working on augmented reality, which may wipe out not only all of our devices, but our eyeglasses and transform professions. But why are companies coming here? Why did IBM put Watson right in the middle of Kendall Square? Watson, I'm sure you're sophisticated here, you know that Watson is the computer that won Jeopardy over the humans that could outthink them, but really what Watson is software that learns from us and helps us think differently. Who knows what the future brings? Therefore, what you want is people who learn with foundational institutions that help teach them. Some of them also hold them back. When Greater Boston, I mean, I would say Massachusetts in the innovation economy is heavily Greater Boston. And that's a shame. There are some innovations coming out of other parts of the state. There have been attempts through the years in the Dukakis administration to have centers of innovation, centers of excellence come out of other parts of the state, and that has worked to some extent. But it's heavily Greater Boston, which also has our downside, because innovation attracts people, and when you don't have a system that supports the kind of expansion and growth you need, you're stuck with no parking, which is the Kendall Square and Seaport District problem. We had the first subway in the United States and can't expand the T now. So innovation quickly gives rise to orthodoxy, and the way you get more of it is you constantly have people with fresh ideas who challenge that and have the courage to stand up to it. And if they're helped along by facilities, incubators, the Cambridge Innovation Center, what that does is it gives people not only space, but it gives them the courage because they're part of a community where there are other courageous people trying to outthink one another as they come up with fresh ideas.
Thank you. Janice, building on or conflicting with what Rosabeth has said, from your perspective, what are the factors which you see as making a bigger difference in innovation in Massachusetts than other places?
Well, actually, building on what Rosabeth said, there's really, I think we found over these 400 years, about 10 factors, but top 5 go like something like this. Presence of entrepreneurs, presence of capital, money, the need for a local demand for whatever the products are people are producing, a global demand, and networking, proximity. And Rosabeth touched on 2 of those. She talked about people and she talked about places. I would say if I had to think about the top 3, I would say it would be the presence of people, but people who can be entrepreneurial. You need all types to drive innovation, but people who will have that courage, who are willing to take the risk. You need the money and the capital, and we have it here. So sometimes when I travel a lot of places are trying to emulate Massachusetts, and they're trying to replicate what we have here. But some of this is just sort of natural phenomena. We have a certain amount of volume of entrepreneurs because of the schools and their turnout and the ideas. We have built a place where funds and whether it's venture capital, angel funding, state-supported programs, where there's resources. I mean, you need money to do this. You can't do this just in your garage. You might start there, but certainly in life sciences, you can't start in your garage. You really need sources of capital, and you need proximity. One thing, because of our tight geographical orientation, we're able to get out and see people cross sectors, within our sector, within institutions. Someone who just has a great idea are able to get out and actually network and see each other quickly, easily, within that same day. They don't need to drive in the car, they can choose to, they can get on the T, they can walk, they can bump and connect into each other. And that kind of volume in each of those categories, I think, has really positioned Massachusetts over the 400 years. So every time we have failed, we've managed to come back. Why? Because we repeatedly have those factors in place. And I would say there's one other thought tangential to this, and we touched on it a little bit, which is social innovation. When you bring people together who are open-minded, who come from a construct that says the rigor of the day is to question, is to challenge, is to critique, and to do that out loud, you also drive social innovation, and they're more open thinkers. And so we're more apt to create an environment where we think more broadly beyond just technological innovation, but we talk about what kind of culture, what kind of environment do we want our children to be in? Do we want each other to live in? And hence why you see Massachusetts has also historically been the first on many social innovations. Bob mentioned a couple, but you have the first public school, you have the first public library, you have a number of innovations we could go through that came about because you had people who not only thought about technological advances, but social. And then the last point on institutions. Not everyone may be aware, a place like MIT is a land-grant institution. Well, what does that mean? That means that one of their early missions was to improve the labor that farmers and general laborers had in the factories, to improve their condition, to make life easier, to make them more efficient and less burdensome for the work that they did. So immediately you have this connection between not only the research that's going on, but the actual translation into improving lives. And that, I think, has allowed us to be successful over the 400 years and will carry us into the future.
Thanks. Travis? I think we should begin to have a little bit of controversy here, but some would argue that
Why are you turning to me for controversy?
Well, some would argue that our preeminence in innovation is very, very fragile. And should biotech head south, should federal spending on medical research decline, we might begin to slip rather precipitously, as has happened in the past, as we've seen. So what do you think from your vantage point?
I don't know if I'm going to inject any degree of controversy.
All right, I'll take that.
Yeah, you take the controversy. I've got your back, Tim. I guess what I would say is this summer I had the pleasure of taking a trip out to the Worcester County area, and without going into detail as to why I went out to Clinton, Massachusetts. I don't know if any of you have actually been out to Clinton, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And those of you who have actually been to the Wachusett Reservoir. But I had the pleasure of heading out to the res this summer and met with the Clinton Town Fathers. The reservoir, for those of you who don't know, is the second largest body of water in Massachusetts. And when it was built, it was the largest man-made dam in the world. And there's actually a fascinating story, and Bob, you'd appreciate the history of this, but there's a fascinating story that goes into detail about how the civic leaders in the Worcester County area and the civic leaders in Massachusetts chose to do something incredibly radical to essentially drown a number of towns and build this reservoir in order to forward-looking create a resource that would feed all of the innovation and economic activity that was taking place here in the greater Boston area. If you can imagine the heartache and the disruption that act caused to destroy people's homes, people's lives, people's churches, people's institutions in order to create a generational asset. That is, I think, one of the acts that embody and typify why Massachusetts continues to be Phoenix rising from the ashes. It's not just the brain power, it's not just all the stuff that Rosabeth and Janice correctly pointed out. It's bringing that same ethos about risk, that same ethos about being bold, that same ethos of leadership, and inserting that into our political and civic institutions. That is paired with all the other elements of entrepreneurship and innovation, having those entrepreneurs, innovators, and bold thinkers and leaders amongst your political and civic leaders, something that for 400 years we have represented to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world. So fast forward and you apply that principle to this current economic cycle and to the life sciences, and you find yourself with an organization like mine, the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center, which was one of, at the time, 8 years ago, one of the boldest initiatives by any governor in the United States of America to dedicate state resources, a large chunk of your money to forwarding an individual sector, the life sciences, knowing that this was not just about economic development and job creation, this was a generational move. And we participated, this organization participated, was and continues to be a very valuable puzzle piece in this acceleration, this very rapid acceleration that you feel, and many of you are probably a part of, in the life sciences. Literally and figuratively, there are conditions that when I was a kid even, and I'm not even that old, when I was a kid, that were death sentences that are now not only treatable but curable. I'm 46 years old. I grew up in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And like most of us that grew up in New York, we can tell you some stories about the AIDS epidemic that are very personal. And we grew up, and I sat down with my daughters the other day and watched Rent. And they're jonesing on the music and everything like that. My wife and I are in tears because there's this very visceral reaction we had to when we grew up to the AIDS epidemic, and they just didn't get it. I mean, they totally didn't get it because they're growing up in a world where, in large part, AIDS is not a death sentence. That's all part of this rapid acceleration in the life sciences that is being led by you and being powered by some pretty bold civic leadership that has been driven out of this state. So I don't want to oversell the point about the brain power, the concentrate, the density. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. But you should ask, and you're going to get bold leadership. You should ask for and you should look for that same level of innovation, entrepreneurship, risk coming from your civic leaders that you ask for and you expect coming out of the CIC.
And coming out of the CIC, Tim Rowe. And Tim, as you look at it, what do you see as crucial? I know that you've talked about proximity in the past, and is Boston really different in terms of proximity of people or networking than other cities that you're working in? Or is this something that's a little bit of a special case?
Thank you, Bob. And thank you also to Gavin Cleespies from Mass Historical Society for kind of conceptualizing this. Somewhere in the back hiding, I think you are, Gavin. Welcome to the audience, many familiar faces here. Many of you could probably be up on this panel. This is a really exciting moment for, I think, all of us to just delve into what makes us great, and therefore, really, what are the lessons that we take away from that in terms of what do we need to keep doing or be careful to keep doing to make sure that this success we've had continues. Bob did me the great favor of going last, so I got a chance to listen to all of the really interesting perspectives from everybody on the panel, and I want to do a couple of things. I want to add a couple of 2 cents to that, but then see if I can kind of highlight what I see as the, where do we need to make sure we get this right going forward types of points. I've been fortunate at CIC in the last couple of years to be looking at bringing the model we have at Cambridge Innovation Center to other cities. Yeah, I've spent a great deal of time in Tokyo, in the Netherlands, in Warsaw, we're starting work in France and Ireland and a few other places. And so I've been looking at their innovation ecosystems, at their cities, how they work, and thinking a lot about how they're different from what we have here. And there are a couple of things that have really stood out for me that wouldn't have been in my list sort of 5 years ago. And Bob and I have been talking about this topic now for, I won't say how many years. This is such an important topic for us that I hope some of these observations you'll find interesting. So the first is, indeed, all of the things that we've heard here, the focus on knowledge, the entrepreneurial capital, the local demand, our willingness to challenge, to change, the foresighted leadership to build the reservoir in Clinton. I don't know why Clinton keeps coming up in blue states. I don't know why that's important here today. I asked myself what got us here in the first place, and I think there are a couple of basic things. I was kind of kidding with Janice, but it's cold and rainy here a lot, so we kind of stay indoors and we work hard. So we were fortunate to have some kind of basics. We're set up to do that. My family took a vacation in the Caribbean recently, and literally, just the fruit on the trees would feed you all year if you did nothing but just walk in the forest and pick it, and that makes it harder to focus. So we have that. I think we are incredibly fortunate to have an immigrant culture here, as someone mentioned. The line is, immigrants, we get the job done. Anyone? All right, that's a Hamilton reference. I think that's that risk taking and that sort of boldness that comes from people who were willing to pull up stakes and cross the ocean and start something new. I think we've got a lot of that here. We don't have any natural resources. I've spent some time recently in Russia and the Middle East, and they have such amazing natural resources that you can pull out of the ground, like the Caribbean island, that it sort of warps the economy. We just don't have those. What we do here is based on our hands, what we can build, the manufacturing economy that we had, and our minds, right? Mind and hands may be familiar because it's mens et manus. It's the motto of MIT. But that's really right. That's what we've got. And by the way, the hands part is getting tougher because of the current balance of labor costs around the world. And that may not change. That may not continue forever, by the way. I think that a lot of the places that are providing the hands today, like China, are going to get more expensive over the coming decades. And so the place that we live, mind, that's our refuge right now, and that has to be, this is the first of the lessons, that has to be, if you look at the global economy, the place that we continue to excel, or we're in trouble, right? Because we can't go back to hands, and we don't have resources, so we got to rely on our minds. So first piece is, what do we need to do to continue to be able to rely on our minds? Now, we have another amazing advantage that has struck me in the last few years, and this is what's really new. We have a culture of integrity in Massachusetts. It may come from some of the religious heritage that we, that we brought to this nation. I'm not sure, but we're a place where you can do business here in Massachusetts with somebody, whether it's public sector, private sector, and shake hands, and nearly always rely that the person on the other side is going to do what they said they would do. They will follow through. If there's a problem, they'll tell you there's a problem. And in a lot of the world, there is an increasing, unfortunately, an increasing perspective of take what you can take. I'll go political as well right now. Last night watching the debate, there were some comments about, you didn't pay any taxes, or you didn't pay your, pay your people, and one of the contestants, I guess I could call it, it's what it looks like, right? Said, that's business, right? Well, no, it's not. This is community. This is society that we're building together. And if you want to lead this society, I hope you have higher values than that. And that's something I think that we have very strongly here. And so innovation, interestingly, this sort of building new things, creating new companies, requires that somebody comes to you with a crazy idea that, first of all, probably wouldn't work, because 95% of them, don't really work, and that's part of the whole process, right? That you have these, I want to put electricity through a wire, and it's going to light, and it's going to glow, and that's going to light all of our, houses, and allow us to study into the night where we couldn't before, or something, or not burn down our houses with candles or something. So these innovators are doing crazy things, and so to finance, to support, to go to work for an innovator, create a startup, requires that you trust them. And so in the places where you can't trust people, where they're coming in, they're saying, I've got a better light bulb, and you just don't have that basis of being able to trust, that basis of integrity, then venture investment, which is just a fancy word for taking crazy risks on new ideas, right, just doesn't happen. And so there's a lot of the world that doesn't have the venture investment or the kind of crazy risks on new ideas that we have here, and that relies on this culture of integrity that we have. So I look at that and I say that's one of our biggest advantages. Okay, so if those are the advantages, and you got to kick me, Bob, because I get excited about this stuff, and you tell me when I need to shut up. I just want to highlight.
1 minute.
All right, 1 minute. I just want to highlight the things that I think we can, we need to be very careful to maintain. So first of all, we are concentrated. That does lead to proximity, which is what Bob prompted. Proximity is a huge driver for collaboration and innovation. It's being able to walk and talk and so forth. We do need to double down on that. That means in our public sector, and this is not always popular, we do need to go up, for instance. We do need to have, when they redevelop Volpe, Jan, you're here, probably it's not that popular to imagine a 1,000-foot tower in Kendall Square, right? But actually, that's how you build proximity. So it's just something to think about. It's not a crazy notion. Jane Jacobs, the famous urbanist who wrote about how to make healthy cities, told us that healthy cities come from dense cities. And so just something to think about. The second, we have fantastic transportation. The shipbuilding and the harbor we've had has made us successful 200, 300, 400 years ago. Today, when we talk about transportation, we're talking about things like direct flights, which we're doing a great job on, and our internal transportation, our public transit, which sucks, right? The experts who reviewed the safety of the Red Line said they wouldn't ride it after they reviewed the safety, right? We are already hitting peak capacity at rush hour and they're predicting doubling of ridership over the next 15 years. How are we going to support that and stay a public transit community? So this is something we need to focus on. We need to figure out, if we want to stay a community of integrity, a community that people respect each other, where we can build this, we need to figure out how to be a more integrated society. We still suck at that. There are a lot of places that suck at that, but we do too. We've got a lot of people who are not able to be part of the innovation community, able to be part of economic success so far in the community. There was a study released by the Fed in Boston that looked at the city of Boston. They looked at the average assets of white families, and they found that it's about $256,000. Average assets is your house, your car, your savings, all that. And they looked at the average assets of African American families in Boston, and who here knows what that number was? Anyone? Travis knows. $700. So what are we doing? Is this really? It was that's right. Lower than 700, excuse me.
Actually, I have it in my wallet.
$8? Okay, maybe it was a slightly different time frame that, or whatever, I just may be misremembering. It doesn't matter. The point is, we're not doing this. We haven't figured this out yet as a community, and we can. We're a wealthy community in the grand scheme of how the world works. We're an incredibly wealthy community. We have many advantages we've just described. This isn't easy. You can say it's important and say you're going to do something about it, and there are very few, okay, here's the easy thing you can actually do about it, things you can do about it, but we need to figure it out.
I'd love to pick up from that because I just loved everything you were saying. We are all confined to such short time. So first of all, about weather, yes, those long winters, you spend a lot of time thinking. So on that, income inequality and integrity and values. So it's partly an answer to the question that Bob asked Travis about what happens if all the federal funding dries up. I mean, when Massachusetts was stagnating, it was the time when it was maximally depending on federal largesse and big companies, which are great when they flow, but they're not necessarily a source of the future. So a source of the future is more people with more ideas willing to find whatever it takes to support those ideas. The values and integrity part, I mean, some of our social innovations, City Year, for example, the whole idea of national service, AmeriCorps, it started here. It was City Year that really got national service in the United States and is now doing heroic things in inner city schools. And the downside of the prosperity of the blue states is, in fact, the blue states have more income inequality. This is a ripe arena for innovation. Begin to figure out another Khan Academy that can get to kids that are left out. Begin to figure out another way to connect people who are left out. The transportation, many of you know because I wrote a book, Move, never thinking that infrastructure would suddenly be on the top of everybody's want-to-do list for the economy. But transportation, I became obsessed with it. This is an opportunity for innovation, and in fact, coming to Boston is a pop-up urban minibus system, which is now starting to partner with the public sector. And the city of Boston has an innovation center, its Urban Mechanics Lab, that has been invested. They did drive out a parking app, but they've been investing in parking apps. I mean, things that ease the problems. So rather than the problems being a limitation, in some ways, the problems are the innovations of the future, and that there are going to be smart people thinking up solutions to them. And in the life sciences, we'll go on. It's not any one industry, it's the ability to invent industries. And we can't even say now what the boundaries of industries are anymore. Telecom and computing and media and mobility are all intersecting, and Amazon wants to rule the world. But notice, when they want to rule the world, they may have started elsewhere for other reasons. They come back here. Facebook, Google, and they all want to be here. So we make it attractive enough to be here.
Great. So building on that, but taking it a little bit different directions. What about, we have a situation where the innovation of the last 20 years and particularly recently has led to housing prices going up, and so this wonderful group of people in the 250 colleges that we recruit to the region find it incredibly hard to find a place to live, particularly in their most innovative period of their life. Many people feel in their 20s and 30s. So what about, how do we take those two contending forces and look at what we might do?
It's easy.
Yeah, Tim?
Not my idea, but Colin Angle, iRobot founder, says self-driving cars. If you put 4 people in a self-driving car and it drives from Warren, Massachusetts to Boston and drops them off at work, it is half the carbon footprint of their taking the train.
Also zoning. We have a Cambridge City Council here. We could have more people living in some of those big houses that would like to have more people living in them, and they can't because we restrict certain areas. And there are many attractive areas of the city, vice versa, that could have live-work spaces where you live and work in the same place.
Travis?
Well, first of all, I think that's a little bit of a leading question. We have a denser footprint of colleges and universities in Massachusetts than anywhere else in the United States. I think we should have a degree of expectation that we will continue and we will always export talent. So we shouldn't go into this with the expectation that we're going to capture 100% of those brains. That being said, densification of our urban cores tied to transportation innovations like self-driving cars will certainly improve the livability of our urban cores. But I also, being on the board of the Conservation Law Foundation, I also have to put a shout out to conservationism. And one of the loveliest things about being in Massachusetts is the fact that it is a four-season state. One of the loveliest things about Massachusetts is your ability to leave the urban core and participate in an environment that is really just absolutely stunning. So I am actually not a fan of transforming the entire state of Massachusetts into looking like Kendall Square. I really think that would be a shame in many ways. As in all things in life, I believe, in terms of public policy, I believe in balance. This notion of transportation innovation should carry forward and outward into the Metro West area, into Worcester County, to ensure that people can choose what type of environment in which they want to live. I grew up in Harlem, one of the densest cities in America, and you can't get me to move back into the city. I simply will not do it. I'm done with it. I'm tired. Right now I live in Lexington. I have a yard. I have a garden. I urban farm. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Chickens?
Well, I have a Siberian Husky, so she would eat the chickens.
Thank you, Travis. What I'd like
But
to...
I think in terms of looking forward, being able to continue to attract the best and the brightest minds is being able to continue to provide a diverse living environment for people coming from all over the world, not just within the urban core.
Well, great. Let me take us in a little bit different direction. GE in January announced that they were moving to Boston from Fairfield, Connecticut. And what impact, if any, does having one of the, I guess, the 7th largest company move its headquarters back to Boston? And do you see that happening with other companies? So, Janice, do you want to?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to have them come to Boston for a number of reasons. Over the years, we have lost headquarters. And people might say, well, why is that so important? We have the working arm of many of the other large companies who are headquartered elsewhere, but they're here, and that is true. But I will tell you that when companies headquarter in a community, there's a certain social commitment to that community. They are housed there. They are based there. It's the prime place by which all things go forth. And I think when I think back about 20 years, maybe even 25 years or longer, Boston had a large number of companies that were here from various sectors that were headquartered here. And they were the primary base by which civic leaders, the government, the community could go forward and say, we have a challenge locally. We have an initiative we want to do, a social idea we want to do, but we need local leaders who are willing to stand up and put their resources and their time, their people, and their money behind those ideas and activities. And there were a lot of innovations that were created, or opportunities, because these companies that were headquartered here were able to deploy those resources because they were part of the community. They weren't tangential, they were here, and this was their home. So I think the fact that GE is headquartering here, the fact that we may continue and hopefully attract other companies to headquarter here, I think bodes for a tighter knit of a community, and I think that's a very good sign.
Great. What I'd like to do is to see whether there's questions that you might want to ask one other on our panel, and so let's start.
I have a question for Tim. So you've been traveling around and looking at other places, and you've had the construct of the CIC. So if you look forward and you think about ways in which groups of people might work together, are you seeing any change in the dynamics of what you saw originally as a model within the CIC, and has that evolved, and what does that speak about the spaces of tomorrow?
That's a really awesome question. Thank you. Kind of a layup. So
It wasn't meant to be.
First of all, 15 years ago when we got started, what we were doing was really weird. People were saying, like, you're going to be in a space with like everybody else, and you're going to share the conference rooms, and it just seemed kind of odd, and that's completely gone now. This is sort of de rigueur. Google Android started at CIC, and they thought that was completely okay. That and Amazon did its Fire Phone at CIC. I think the Globe reported, and it wasn't weird for them that they were taking important projects and putting them into these shared environments. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think we're seeing is that it's increasingly shared. So it used to be you'd be in a shared building, but you'd still have your own office with a door and a lock and your own sort of desk and stuff. And more is, you're kind of in a big room with everybody else in the same room. You might even be sharing the desk. So you don't have a dedicated desk. When you're in Boston, you're sitting at a desk. So there's a big area of CIC where there's little cubbies, like in preschool. And you kind of put your stuff there when you're not when you're not there, and each desk is sold twice, which makes it half as expensive. So
Wow.
the price point to be in Kendall Square is in some ways lower than it's ever been before, even though the rents are higher than they've ever been before, and that's because of this increased comfort with sharing. So that's a big piece. It also goes culturally. So we've seen big corporations, the world's largest corporation, Shell, put its Open Innovation Center inside CIC and its venture capital group. They're saying, we can't do this internally. Nike Converse told me recently that they spend billions on R&D internally, and they're starting to realize that they should be spending more of their R&D, what they call external R&D, which is spending money with startups and with research groups at universities and so forth, kind of being out there instead of being, focused internally. So I think that thinking is now pervading all of the larger business community, and means that there's a sort of a desire to be kind of not just physically present, but sort of really working together with these 3-person startups. And that's a change. And because of that, it's becoming increasingly important, and maybe we're getting to the point where it's becoming necessary to be in an innovation community. The way I think about it is that there was a time when before universities, when an inventor might have an estate, in the countryside, and they'd, have their kite, and they'd be, getting, lightning to strike it or something, and now they do that work in a university because they need to be around colleagues. They need to be around others doing it and learning from them, and sharing, the cyclotron or other kind of gear that they need. So that's now happening in the stage after university. And I think we're just at the beginning innings of that, but we're going to see things that look like universities that are the next step in the major cities around the world. That's what we're doing, but we think that's where the world is going.
So coupling that with the GE move, there is a new way of working. And there was a time, it's what built where you are now. You're still in Waltham, out in the outer ring, 128, 495, et cetera, when companies felt they needed a campus if they were of any size. They needed to be out, remote and isolated. It was part of what led our tech community to be so walled off. and closed compared to the tech community in California, which still, they have some campuses. You
And
just
they're
can't
now
get to
more
them.
walled off than we are.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't get to the campuses because there's no transportation. The trend now, cities are hot. And it's because of the density, it's because of the proximity. And so I feel the GE thing, I mean, I know what Jeff Immelt stands for on national competitiveness. That's great to have his kind of leadership, but they're going to be looking globally. But what it means is it's more an affirmation of what we've built here, to me, than it is opening a new era. It's an affirmation of proximity, density, open innovation, that you need to be in touch with the next thinkers, not just the people you already know, and that you come to places like this. And think about it ironically, because we thought the death of distance. I mean, now you don't have to be in physical contact
We all
to do
video
anything
conference
to talk to
all
anybody.
day, yeah.
And look at what's happening. In fact, the most distant, remote communication technology companies all want to be packed in little things where they have a locker. It looks like junior high school in some of their facilities. I mean, they're prettier lockers, I must say. And also, by the way, this is an accommodation to change. We are in a different era. We're in an era in which cities are back. Cities are no longer sources of blight, and everybody wants, cities are hot. It's why we have to be careful as inner cities become magnets also for this kind of talent. We're going to be pushing the poor to the outskirts where they're going to be in isolated places with no transportation. So, but I think I liked what you say. But to me, GE, less transformative than affirming of the fact that we're hot, because they're moving from Fairfield, Connecticut, where Jeff Immelt, if you read my book, had to get off his mobile phone when trying to do a deal with somebody in Africa because he was running out of cell phone coverage because not enough broadband in America. That's Fairfield County. Look at LaGuardia Airport, the third world. We won't get into that third world, but it is.
Great.
Who are you quoting now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not right.
So we're within a minute or two here. One last comment from anybody that they want to make on how we're going to stay innovative based on this?
I have a shout out, and it's to what Travis is doing in the Mass Life Sciences Center. So started with Governor Patrick, it's continued under Governor Baker. They understood that life sciences was a particular strength of this community, and for all the reasons we talked about, it's a natural. And Governor Patrick committed $1 billion to strengthening the life sciences community. And Travis and his team at the Mass Life Sciences Center, this is a little wonky for those of you who don't follow like the nuts and bolts, but this is how a lot of the infrastructure, the research facilities in Massachusetts are paid for so that we stay a life sciences leader. And so I want to thank you for your work.
Thanks, Tim. And I have a reciprocal shout out.
We organized this ahead of time.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, a little
We do this every time.
Yeah. What was the Virginia Slims commercial from when we were younger? You come a long way, baby. The CIC
Why,
is
thank you.
Incredible. And I made this comment at the Lab Central annual meeting before you arrived. The CIC is a really interesting place, not because of its physical infrastructure. That, in my mind, is kind of academic. What makes the CIC unique is that it is a microcosm, a reflection of the broader community. It has a very high CQ, what I call a very high CQ. And if you actually take a look at innovation, in my opinion, over centuries, it is those cities, those places that have a high CQ that actually thrive continually over and over.
This is like IQ, but a community quotient?
That's
Is that
exactly
okay?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And you should be proud of what you've created. But the real shout out I want to give you, Tim, is because sitting here on this panel, I didn't have to bring up an issue that I am both passionate and vociferous about, and that is the heterogeneity that is required in order to be a fully functioning community. And we have to put our money where our mouths are when it comes to diversity. I'm fed up and tired with the lip service as it relates to this issue. And Tim, you've really done a great job at the CIC and in your own personal life of sort of bringing that personal commitment of yours to the workplace. So shout out to you.
Diversity, I have to make one comment about your love-in, because here's our other advantage, and it's a little bit of an advantage over Silicon Valley, and that is the private sector and the public sector talk to each other. So we just had a little love-in between private and public.
Right.
And in California, in Silicon Valley, they often don't believe the public sector should exist at all. And at all. I talk to people out there, the rules don't apply to them. Why are there rules? Forget it. So that's a wonderful thing we have here, is that we do know how to collaborate across sectors. And I often say it doesn't, we say it takes a village, that's the old African proverb, takes a village to raise a child. I say it takes a cross-sector, multi-stakeholder coalition.
Well, thank you. That's a perfect point to transition to something just a little bit different here.
It's interesting that almost a lot of the topics that you're talking about are actually transportation related, whether it was the proximity, the density, the equity, the social justice, the red line capacity, the suburban transit, the carbon emissions. And so a lot of this is related to transportation. And I've also seen personally experienced lack of courage in our local politicians' environments for taking risks and being able to look at that, considering it's such a high impact.
Okay,
and
so the question is,
So two of the five board members I've personally tried to contact and have had a lack of response from that. And I would say that what is Massachusetts going to do to sort of solve a transportation and be able to take those risks that we need to do?
Well, we have one congressman here, Seth Moulton, who's all about transportation, and not everybody might agree with things like a north-south rail link, but he's a champion of transportation. But I will say education makes a huge difference. Marty Walsh, Mayor Walsh, they're now talking about how Boston can be a place to test autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, or buses or trucks. At South by Southwest Interactive last May, last March, I wrote in a Google Lexus self-driving with a mayor and a first lady of a city, because the U.S. Conference of Mayors were gathering mayors to firsthand experience technology so they wouldn't be afraid of it. So one thing we could do with this rich technology community is educate our elected officials, give them a taste, take them on tours, win them over about what the possibilities might be.
I also think it takes a crisis.
Don't we have one?
I think it's the magnitude. I think we saw a little piece of that during the winter crisis. People were like, what is this all about? So it motivated them to a certain degree, but if you look at our 400 years of innovation, it was a crisis. We reached the bottom, and we had to do something. And people said, oh, this is what we have. What are we going to do with what we have? And started something fresh using all those same tools and resources. So I'm not sure what that crisis has to look like, but I think it has to be a crisis that actually makes people realize they have to think differently. It's not a repair of the same way of thinking, it's thinking differently, and I'm not sure we've hit it.
One of the things that I really loved hearing was talking about actual proximity of actual humans to each other. I completely agree with you. One of the problems that I see for how we're doing housing around here is that we've created so much transience. We aren't creating places that people want to stay in. So we're building lots and lots, and yet people move around. They don't become part of the community. And eventually, I think we're going to have to deal with that. and also the whole diversity, not just of what you look like, but socioeconomic diversity and all of these things, because that's where we're going to keep getting innovation. So how would you deal with that? And
Okay, who wants to take? Okay, Tim?
Yesterday, Boston did a nice piece on how to solve the housing crisis in Boston, and one of the things they talked about was to open up innovation in it. So it's too expensive, which is one of the challenges to diversity, and there are ideas around microhousing and communal housing that aren't legal right now. There's the notion of single room occupancy that we kind of shut down in the 70s. There might be an OOs or tens answer to that changes that. I think that if we solve the transportation issue, it helps with the housing issue, because you can live in Warren, Mass. and work downtown. And so it doesn't put quite so much pressure on cities like Cambridge to house everybody. Those are my two quick answers. Innovate and do it differently, and make it easier for people to get in from places where they can have a yard.
Great. Sir?
Hey, I'm Zach Aarons. I'm with Millennium Partners. We're real estate developers in Boston area. We were just designated for a 500,000 square foot office building.
Yes, you were. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a daunting task, and that's why I'm here. When looking for an anchor tenant, where should we look? Should we look at companies that are currently based in the suburbs, to your point, that want to be in the city, like an iRobot? Should we look at companies that are already based in the city and growing fast? Or should we look at companies that are based elsewhere who might want to move to Boston, like a GE? And the second part of that question is, what are some companies, in your opinion, who would be good for our office building?
Actually, I think the notion, all of the
All of
above,
them,
obviously,
all of them.
you're a sales guy, but I think the notion of thinking it through which would be the next GE is appealing. I think it's put a stake in the ground. There are probably 200 companies worldwide that are in a sort of a place that might not be the best place for them to be headquartered, and where you could say, look at what GE did, come to Boston, and be in the middle of Boston in a gorgeous new building.
I would actually take a little different tack with that and say, don't focus on trying to bring a net new company here. The data show that large companies do not actually move to a different city without having some sort of a footprint in the city first. In GE's case, we had brought GE Healthcare to Metro West, and so there was an experience, there was a corporate cultural experience with the Metro West Massachusetts area that allowed for that ultimate corporate decision, corporate headquarter decision to be made. I would say stick to your knitting, stick to what's here, stick to an expansion, and if we want to talk offline about companies that are in the area. That's fine, but it would be too hard, too long for you to actually go out and go whale hunting for another big company.
You could also look at companies that are being acquired. So often companies are innovative and they reach a certain threshold where the larger companies want to acquire them, but they don't necessarily want to move them. So that allows for expansion and more of a local presence of that acquiring company to want to have a presence and take a bigger footprint.
So you mean, just to clarify, you mean Boston companies that are getting,
Boston
companies getting
that
acquired by
but
other.
they want to keep them local, but they want to expand and have a greater footprint without necessarily moving their headquarters yet.
I'd like to sort of push back, do something brave and push back against Rosabeth Moss-Cantor about the need for the public sector. You talk a lot about autonomous, not the need for the public sector, whether the public sector is an actual equal partner in a lot of this. And I'll confine that to autonomous vehicles, where you've got billions of dollars of R&D and venture capital up against slow-moving state, city regulators. You can point to Boston, but the fact Boston has no actual expertise on autonomous vehicles. How do you actually make that partnership really work as equal partners? And you've got 30 seconds.
Equal partners is a tough thing. but you can't really begin to expand things. So, you know, our subway system just historically started out with a private sector entrepreneur, just did it. And then later it became a public authority. And most big infrastructure things are neither fully private nor fully public. What kind of a partner the public sector should be? Sometimes it's a partner that helps set the framework and gets out of the way. And that's one thing Ed Markey also always talks about telecom and how we got the internet off the ground. I mean, there certainly was a public sector role, but it was then getting out of the way.
Part of my life, I was living in Fort Point as in a live workspace as an artist, also working for a very innovative company in Central Square. But we were forced out of our out of our living situation by a big bank, and they rezoned the live workspace into commercial space. So my place is now a kitchen for a restaurant. What do you guys see as far as initiatives taking place within the city to retain innovative talent and keep us here with affordable housing?
Janice?
Well, initiatives within the city. Well, if I take a moment and think about 4 Point Channel. And 4 Point Channel was a gathering of artists who lived in very inexpensive accommodations where they could both do their art and they could live. And when 4 Point Channel got redeveloped, a lot of them were pushed out. Now, where did they go? I'm not sure where they go, but I remember I was talking to them about other places that then could be havens, again, where they could be collectively together, have affordable space to do their art and to live. I'm not sure. At the time, we were talking a bit about Chelsea. We were talking about other places where have not been as developed, access to transportation on the shore, on the coastline, which, by the way, I think that's going to get rapidly developed before we know it. But I think when there's opportunities for businesses to come in, I think the town or the city that's happening in needs to think about who's being displaced and where do they go, and can we create another place for them that would be helpful and supportive. But that's one space that I'm not sure where they all went after they left. So I don't have an answer for you, but I think communities need to think about when you're displacing groups of people who are part of your infrastructure, you need to find a place for them to be.
I'd be happy to talk afterwards. I have some ideas.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. This has been great. And I want to thank our panel, Travis and Rosabeth and Tim and Janice, for doing this, and thank Mass Historical Society for hosting this and really putting together an idea that I think has happened in a great way of combining history and the future, and MIT for having us here this morning. Thank you all.
You know, we see the wars in Syria, we see what's happening in Iraq, but what we don't see are the continual displacements of people. If we talk about Palestinians who still are displaced, if we look at the various people in Asian nations, Burmese, Bhutanese, who have been living in camps and in untenable situations for years and years and years,